Right, Assalamualaikum and good day everybody. Okay, for today I am going to talk about the homeostasis for BIO270 for chapter 1. Okay, in actual fact in chapter 1 we do have what they call the homeostasis and excretory system. So for this video we're going to go for the first part, which is on homeostasis. So the outline of this chapter 1, we're going to introduce you what is basically the animal system is all about, and we look into the maintenance of internal environment because of homeostasis. How do they regulate the environment of your body through thermoregulation, blood glucose, as well as osmoregulation. And also we're going to go through various types of heterogeneous waste. And lastly, we're going to look at the types of excretory system. How is waste being excreted out from the body in animals? Not all. We're also going to focus on human as well. Okay, so basically, if you recall back what you have learned in part 1 and part 2, we look at the hierarchy, the level of organization starting from the molecules to the cell to the tissue, organ, system, and organism itself. So part 1, you study about molecules and cell, right? And also a little bit on tissue. So now in our part 3, we'll be looking at 3 various levels, which are tissue, organ, and system. But before we start anything, you must know how to define all these 3 systems. So what is tissue? So tissue is defined as a group of specialized cells adapted to carry out a specific function. Right? Whereas organ is a collection of 2 or more tissues which carries out a specific function or functions. Alright? So another one is system. Okay, in this system, we look into the more than 2 organs that perform a specific function in the body, and the main purpose for this system is to maintain homeostasis. So you try to get an example of this tissue, organ, and system and see how does it work in this case. And as you all know that each level in the hierarchy is of increasing complexity, and all organ systems work together in order to maintain life. So that's why you have to recall back what you have learned for the plus part 2, part 1 and part 2 in order to that you can understand what's going on in part 3. So these are an example of the functions and also the main component of the organ system. So if you look for one example which I like to give to you regarding the digestive. So the main components of digestive system, there are many. Mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, intestine, liver, pancreas, and anus. All these are main components. Okay, and you can see some organs are involved like liver, pancreas, stomach. Those are organs. So there are more than 2 organs perform a specific function in this case. So what are the main function here is to process the food. So this is why this is called an organ system. Okay. So there are many type of system involved. So you have to look into this. Okay. Right. So we go through the definition of homeostasis. Okay, basically homeostasis comes from a Greek word, homoios means similar, stasis means standing still. It means that keeping things stable or without change. So we define homeostasis according to scientific term is the body's ability to maintain physiological favorable internal environment even as when the external condition or environment undergo dramatic shift. And usually when there's external condition that can be lethal, mean death towards individual cell. Alright. So before we start everything, you will need to understand some 2 important terms, regulator and conformer. Okay, so this is we focus on human or animal, where animals that use internal control mechanism to moderately control or regulate internal change in the face of environmental fluctuation. So these are the example. Whereas conformer means it allows its internal condition to vary the change. Okay. So what are the internal components of homeostasis? Okay, basically these are the one important variables that we need to look at in order to maintain our homeostasis, which are oxygen and carbon dioxide concentration, blood pH, nutrient and waste product concentration, salt and other electrolyte concentration, and as well as volume and pressure of extracellular fluid. So how do you cope this environmental fluctuation? Is through the act of regulating and conforming, like what you have learned just now between the differences between regulator and conformer. Okay. So basically, okay, this slide shows a very comprehensive information regarding how homeostasis works as a control system. Okay, there's a difference between control center and control system. System is a very generalized, it's a holistic manner. Okay, so when there is a change in optimum condition in the cell, usually these are detected by the receptors, and receptors normally have sensors. Okay, so when there is an input, okay, sent to this sensed by this receptor. Okay, how does this info being sent? It is to going along the afferent pathway. So you know the difference, afferent and efferent. There's two different ways. Afferent is the one that is the beginning. So A, you know A B C D E. So A first, all right. So this receptor will receive all this info, and then it goes to the control center, and this control center will process the information and then pass to the effector. Alright, so this effector will give an output, will give response. So how does this information been sent? It has been sent through the efferent pathway. So E, exit. So sometimes you see this dashed line here is called feedback loop. Why? Because sometimes you need to correct, because you do not need to amplify or to be increased. When the temperature is being set back to normal, you don't just keep increasing the temperature or decreasing the temperature, right? So it has to have what they call a feedback loop. You need to restore the condition back to optimum level. Right. Under the types of feedback mechanism, there are two types, okay, which are negative feedback and positive feedback. Okay, if we look at negative feedback, okay, it has two type of processes, which is one to raise the levels, another one is to lower them. So the output is actually to use to reduce the input, which means to cause a reverse of the response. So the resulting of this response is to shut off the original stimulus, or to reduce its intensity by slowing or stopping the process. The example of negative feedback would be osmoregulation, thermoregulation, heart rate regulation, blood pressure regulation, even regulation of breathing rate, blood level of glucose, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and others. As for positive feedback, the output is usually to enhance the input, or usually to amplify the response. So, for example, under the positive feedback is the blood clotting and as well as childbirth. So if we look at for BIO270, two things that normally been discussed or been explained in detail for the negative feedback is there are the thermoregulation as well as the control of blood sugar. So we go into thermoregulation. So thermoregulation is control or regulation of temperature. So who is the what is the main controller for this thermoregulation is the brain. Okay, and usually the brain control the processes that hold the temperature of the blood very close to a set point at 37 degrees Celsius. So if it's too hot, so there will be some processes or mechanism that is involved. For example, the vasodilation of blood vessels, which will promote sweating, and also the piloresection, which means the skin hairs to relax, okay, as well as to do some stretching reaction. Okay, so this is one of the pictures to show you how in detail and the flow chart or the flow diagram. As for example, if it's too cold, then we have what they call the mechanism of vasoconstriction of blood vessel, where you do not have any sweating involved, and we have the piloerection, okay, and of course you start to curl up. Your body starts to react when it's too cold. You start to curl up. That's why you need a blanket to cover you up, right? Okay, right. Next one is about regulation of blood glucose or blood sugar. So this is one good example to show you how what happened. So I like to show you another slide which is more in detail, which is this one. All right. So let's say we know that blood sugar when it's balanced is normally the measurement is around 90 milligram per 100 ml. So what happens when there is a rise of blood sugar, which means, for example, you just had your nasi lemak, so that is a stimulus. So the receptor will detect it and it will send messages by who? Okay, so what normally it will trigger the organ, okay, the pancreas to stimulate the release of insulin into the blood. Okay, insulin is a type of hormone. Okay, and what it will do is that it will try to reduce the blood sugar level by three things. One is to promote the cellular uptake of glucose. Another one is to slow down the glycogen breakdown in the liver and to promote the fat storage. So when these three things happen, it will reduce or decline the blood sugar to a set point, and then it will diminish the release of insulin, and then it goes back to balance. Where else? For example, if let's say when the blood sugar drops, okay, let's say you skip a meal or you fast, so what happens is that the pancreas will also stimulate to release another type of hormone called glucagon. And this normally what we do is that it will stimulate the conversion of glycogen to glucose in the liver, and also to stimulate the breakdown of the fat that is being stored, okay, into glucose, and this will increase the blood sugar in the blood sugar, and it will rise to a set point, okay, and it will start to stimulate the glucagon release to reduce, and then goes back to balance of the blood sugar back again. Okay, so this is a slide which I find very useful, and you should try to draw this, okay, and put it into your exercise or your assignment later on. And this slide shows the process of childbirth, which is part of the positive feedback. So what happens is that, okay, the movement of baby along the vaginal canal will stimulate the pressure receptor within the muscular uterus, and it will initiate the sequence of signals to the pituitary gland. So the oxytocin flows through the bloodstream, which is from the mother. It will stimulate the muscle of the uterus in the mother's body, okay, to contract stronger and stronger. So when this contraction intensify or amplify, this will goes on until the baby is being exposed outside the vaginal canal. So when the stimulus to the pressure receptor stop, okay, when the baby is already out, then the oxytocin production will reduce and the level contraction cease. So if you write in your exams, you follow this. There's a numbering here. Number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. Normally, because why? Because in exam normally they want 5 marks. So you need to make sure that you have to write this down in order. Okay? You don't have to draw the picture of the baby. What you need to know is the sequence. Okay? Next one is also another type of positive feedback is happening in blood clotting. Okay, so what happens is that when there is a breakage or in the blood vessel causing bleeding, so the damaged cells will release certain chemicals. It will trigger the initiation of the clotting. So this clotting normally will be released by another additional chemical that will accelerate the clotting condition, and this goes on to form what they call the plaque at the vessel wall, and it will stop the bleeding. So all this just to tell you that amplification is important, especially in positive feedback. Okay, so you will learn this coagulation or clotting factor again in another subject, in immune system later on, which I'm going to explain that later on in the next few coming lectures. So I just want to tell you that there is the importance of homeostatic regulation to human. Okay, why is it very important? Why we need to regulate homeostasis in our body is to prevent potential disruption. When there is disruption, your organ system will function less efficiently or becomes malfunction. Okay, the homeostatic mechanism will fail. It will lead to disease. So if this is not being corrected, then it could result to death. So that's why it is very important when you know that several organ or several system works together in order to maintain homeostasis. For example, if let's say your one of the systems shuts down, okay, the rest of the system will follow. So that's why you have to be careful about homeostasis in our body. So that's why to maintain physiological favorable environment, okay, is through three important conditions. Okay, one is thermoregulation, osmoregulation, as well as excretion. Right? So we continue the next lecture on part 2 on osmoregulation and nitrogenous waste. Thank you.